Hi, my name's Curt Carlson. I want to talk to you about the development of a value creation enterprise and the transformational power that comes from a focus on the discipline of value creation. When I give workshops around the world, I often start with these three questions. I ask people, are you a value creator? Is value creation a responsibility of all professionals? And does your company teach employees the discipline of value creation? In thousands of cases, the answer typically is between 0 and 20% of the people can answer yes to these three questions. For the most part, value creation is not taught to most professionals. I started my career at RCA. It was a great company at the time, but it fell into disrepair and eventually was bought by GE. At the time, I was working on two of the most exciting projects in the company, high-definition television and what would have been basically a big piece of what turned into the internet with companies like Citicorp and NYNEX. After GE acquired us, the part that I was at in Princeton, New Jersey, the research labs was transferred to SRI International, which is headquartered in Silicon Valley. As I just indicated, I believe that value creation is the responsibility of every professional. Why? It's the discipline of identifying and developing solutions that address the needs of others, both external and internal. Basically, that's everybody's responsibility in a company. You're solving problems for others one way or the other, whether they're the end user or it's someone you're reporting to in the enterprise. And as I also indicated, these skills are very rarely taught. And for me, that was a problem because SRI develops products and services for others. So instead of RCA and GE giving me millions of dollars to spend every year, I was now expected to earn millions of dollars. And it turns out that's a very different experience. It was very hard because we didn't have these skills. We read every book. We did everything you could imagine to learn, but we discovered that almost everything was about the what and not the how. We needed the how. We needed to know how to create value for others, and there was very little that we found that was useful. But we met regularly. My team studied and we learned and we tried out different ideas, and eventually we began to grow pretty rapidly. And during this process, we also developed our value creation process, which we now call Innovation for Impact, which I'm sharing a bit of in this video today. Well, when I became CEO of SRI, it's a very famous place in Silicon Valley. It invented the computer mouse, Windows, hypertext, electronic teleconferencing, electronic banking, a whole host of things, received the first internet transmission. But it was in decline, almost 20 years of straight decline. It was in debt, almost bankrupt. It was selling off the land, and some of the buildings were falling down. And there were grudges everywhere because when you're failing, you tend to blame other people. It's a tough place. And the reason was the formerly successful business model was now obsolete. But it also had abundant resources. You can see from this map that SRI is next to Stanford University and Sand Hill Road, which is the epicenter of the venture capital world in Silicon Valley. There were abundant opportunities. This is the golden age for obviously for the internet and many AI and a host of things that are going on then and still today. As I said, perfect location and 1,000 brilliant staff. They just weren't working collaboratively enough to be successful. So that was the situation. Well, we had to change that. The first thing was to change the vision. And our goal was to become the premier independent source of high-value innovation. That's aspirational, obviously. It's hard to judge that. But the goal was to try and be number one in our space. I think if you're not aspiring to be the best at what you do, you're probably not going to keep up, and there's a high likelihood you'll go away. So that was our aspirational goal. Kind of interesting when you're failing for 20 years. The mission wanted to change that, or the part of the strategy too, was not only to solve problems for others, but to create value for ourselves by creating our own high impact, high value innovations. And we're going to do that by training all staff to make the process of value creation our competitive advantage. So that was going to be our strategic competitive advantage. We want to aspire to be the best in the world at that. By training our staff and by pushing decisions down closer to the market, not up. As you'd imagine, in the start, there was very little agreement from employees about our ability to do this. And of course, we also had very few financial resources. In addition, we had some brilliant vice presidents who in a previous formation of SRI had been very successful, but they were misaligned for this new vision for the strategy. And over time, most of them were replaced. And we proceeded by identifying early adopters and showing demonstrated success and building out this the methodology that eventually became part of the entire company. And this is an important point. We didn't want to just be customer-centric. SRI actually was pretty customer-centric when I became CEO, but that's not enough today. The goal was to be customer value creation centric. That is, in every meeting, walking in and trying to figure out how you can create the most value for the customer and for SRI, and do that efficiently and effectively. That was the goal. That's a very different kind of mental framework, and that's what we aspired to do. Now, here are three of the key ideas that we became part of our initiatives. We call the 3 laws of value creation. You have to do, we believe in some way, you have to do some version of these 3 things if you want to be systematically successful. The first is you have to focus on important unmet customer needs. It should be clear that if you don't work on important things, you're not going to make an important contribution. Most people focus on things that are interesting to them, but are frankly not that important. And in our workshops with leading companies all over the world, typically we find less than 25% of what they're working on has any value for anybody. We don't decide that, they do, but we give them a framework to make that assessment. So important, not just interesting. The second is, if you think of the problems today to be solved, they're basically all interdisciplinary. You have to pull together people from bio, info, nano, these are different market segments. These folks all speak their own language. And if you want them to collaborate effectively, they have to have a shared language. So it's not a Tower of Babel. And the only shared value, the shared language that makes sense is that of the customer. That's the common language that everybody has to have. And the most important concept in that family of concepts is that of the value proposition. We studied all kinds of definitions for the value proposition, and we finally said there really needs to be 4 questions that always need to be solved when we're addressing problems that are of importance to others. And those 4 concepts are the need. Obviously, you have to identify that or it doesn't make sense. What's your approach for the offering and the business model? What are the benefits per cost, at the definition of value, that come from that approach? And why are those benefits and costs superior to the competition and all other alternatives? So 4 questions to get started. It's not the whole story, obviously, but everything starts by addressing these 4 questions: need, approach, benefits per cost, competition. If you take one away, you probably don't really know what you're doing. And it's really hard to answer just these 4 questions. So keep it simple, keep it fundamental in the beginning, and have everybody share this common language. Okay, that's still not enough. somehow you need to bring teams together to share the genius of the teams, so you can solve problems and synthesize solutions faster than the competition. So we used again, a very fundamental framework called value creation forums. That's where people would meet every 1 to 4 to 6 weeks. And there'd be 3 to 6 teams, and they'd give short 3 to 10-minute value propositions, again, based on the NABC framework. Clearly, over time, we add lots of other concepts to that to move to a full business plan or a licensing deal. But everything started off with just those 4 questions, because if you get those wrong, you're probably going in the wrong direction. So this was the basic framework we used for all parts of the company. Now, how does that translate into the enterprise? Well, from the outside, SRI looked pretty much like any other company. There's an org chart, and there's a CEO and a board. We had operations, obviously. We had activity focused on major innovations, the ventures that we were forming. And of course, there was an ongoing set of business operations, the different parts of our business, and they were organized according to markets and technical disciplines. So externally, it looked pretty normal, but it was really quite different. From the top down, we worked to push decisions down. We focused on strategic initiatives, staff value creation, development processes, and things like that. And of course, allocation of resources. That's what we focused on. But we tried to be as bottom up as we could, where we focus on where the actual customer needs are, the actual market needs, the technology trends, and where there are new ideas. They typically don't come from the top, they come from the bottom. So somehow you have to pull them up from the ecosystem if you want to do big, important things in today's world that moves so fast. So the virtue of what I've described so far is that when a particular customer need would come in, of course, you have to assemble a different kind of team to address it. And because everyone shared those basic 3 laws, in particular the NABC Value Propositions, we could pull together resources from around the enterprise, and there was a natural way for them to talk to each other and to collaborate. So very different from most companies where there's a hierarchy. We were very flat in terms of the way we actually ran the enterprise inside. And the virtues of this was there was extreme transparency. You could walk around, which I did all the time, into these various activities, and you could see pretty quickly what was going on. We were working on important problems. We were sharing the disciplines of value creation. The basic framework was easy to spot. It was either there or it was not. Some companies talk about the frozen middle. The frozen middle is the part of the organization where ideas don't come in from either the bottom or the top. It's just kind of frozen in place and not very productive. We had very little of that, given the way we organized the place. Obviously, what I just described is an adaptive, customer-focused series of networks that could change depending on what was going on in the marketplace and what we needed. And these stand-up forums that we used that I described were incredibly self-motivating. They tended to be responsive to the marketplace, and it engendered incredible responsibility from our staff. Our staff were terrific, just absolutely terrific at the effort and the motivation they applied. You don't do that if you're going to solve the kind of problems that we were going after. Well, as you can imagine, this wasn't a quick fix. The first year was to establish the vision and the strategy and all the objections we had. Stop losing money, of course, and stop selling the land. That was the first year. But by year 3, we basically had all the fundamental structures in place, and we were starting to grow. I would say by year 7, we basically, these core ideas permeated the entire organization, and we were beginning to show more success. Using the concepts we developed both at enough, the Princeton laboratories I was at initially, and then back at SRI. My teams won 2 Emmys, one for high definition television. The teams at SRI created Nuance, a $20 billion speech company. Intuitive Surgical, that's a $100 billion robotic surgery company. And the last thing when I was there was Siri, which added about 75 billion to Apple. We did okay too, but we didn't get what Steve Jobs got from that. And people were beginning to say good things about us. Mayfield Ventures partner, David Ladd, said SRI is now the best enterprise at turning its technology into economic value. That's nice. Obviously, we didn't think we were done. We felt we were just starting, but we grew the organization over 3 times. And we were beginning to have systematic success. After 16 years, I retired. I got a new CEO who didn't really embrace these value creation ideas, a different kind of management approach. And unfortunately, SRI lost its competitive advantage and declined. He left, and we got a new, SRI has a new CEO now who I think is going to bring the company back into success. But it does point out that if you don't believe in these ideas and don't stick to them, the magic can go away. You have to work and believe in these ideas to create this kind of customer value creation-centric enterprise. Siri is an interesting example of this. We worked on the core technology for a long time. We developed NABC Value Propositions for all kinds of different projects and ventures. Norm Winarski and Bill Mark created a value proposition for what would become Siri, which is the first computer personal assistant. They worked on that, they debugged it, they created the value proposition, developed the business model, and eventually we hired the team you see in the center of this picture. Doug, who's in the center, was our CEO at the time, and Adam Shire on the right was one of the technical geniuses who made it happen. So we eventually spun it out. The company launched its first product, and shortly after that, Steve Jobs called up Doug and said he wanted to come over, and obviously he wanted to buy the company. We weren't crazy about that in the beginning, but eventually he made us an offer the team accepted, and that's how Siri became part of the iPhone. The point here is that this idea of NABC value propositions, which started Siri, continues because even when you become a venture or a company, each team somehow needs to coalesce around solving the needs of their particular customers, whether they're inside or outside. So it's kind of a ubiquitous concept that applies for everything you do if in the business, because in a business, everything you're doing is to serve somebody else. Now, what can you do? Well, if you're a CEO, my recommendation obviously is to provide value creation training to all your staff. It's about the least expensive, most impactful thing you can do. It's amazing why more companies don't do this. It costs almost nothing, and yet the return on it is enormous. If somebody came to SRI, the first thing they did is they went through a 3-day workshop to learn the fundamentals of value creation while working on their project, what would be their project with fellow teammates. So you start working immediately, but in the course of the work, you're also learning these fundamental concepts, which are transformational. And of course, if you can apply the 3 laws of value creation across all the functions, then the impact for that is even greater. If you're an employee and that's not possible, your company's not sponsoring this sort of training, meet over lunch for an hour every couple of weeks and form your own value creation forums with multiple teammates and present the things you're working on and learn all these different value creation concepts that you have access to now on the internet and other places. And you only need one resource. It's pizza. Probably pizza, a salad, and Coke will do the job. It's not about money. It's about you showing up and learning these concepts, and you've got to practice them. You got to practice them. You don't learn these ideas from a book. You've got to do it over and over and again. And then find others, including your management, and demonstrate results that others will notice. We've repeatedly had people who've been through our program. Thousands of people have been through this program from major companies, technical companies like GE, Samsung, Lockheed Martin, and even the BBC. About 150 executives from the BBC went through our program. And they often come back and say, once they learned these ideas and they gave presentations, people said they were the best presentations they'd ever seen in their companies. And the reason is they're now addressing all the critical issues that management needs to understand to be able to make decisions about how to go forward. So in conclusion, if you want to become not just a customer-centric organization, but a customer value creation-centric company, I believe you must provide the essential skills to your staff. And the one we're talking about here is value creation, because that starts everything. Obviously, you're going to teach your staff other things. Design methodology is important. Agile, Scrum, these are important. Six Sigma is important. Basic management techniques and methods are important. There are a lot of things that are important. But what's missing, we find in most companies today, is the start. And the start is always on value creation. If you can't get the start right and you're not going in the right direction, you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and it's going to cost you a lot of money, as we see in most companies. And again, the three laws, important unmet needs, shared language, so it's not a Tower of Babel, and some way to synthesize solutions faster than the competition is fundamental. NABC Value Propositions, as I've argued, it sets the conceptual framework because, again, it sets the direction for everything you do that requires a solution for others. If you can't answer those 4 questions, you probably still haven't figured out what you're doing. And once everybody around the company begins to understand those concepts, it liberates the collective genius of the enterprise. Again, we've never seen an enterprise that failed because of their people. It's always because the management, and in part because they don't have these skills. Imagine an enterprise where everybody knows that when you give a presentation, it starts out with the customer. It starts out with customer needs. And if it's not there, people in the group say, whoops, we don't know what we're doing. We're not specific and quantitative enough about the customer, what they need, and how we're going to solve it. That is transformative. I've also argued it takes time. None of this is easy. You have to learn it experientially by doing it. But if you use these core concepts over and over again, it's almost inevitable that your enterprise will become customer-centric and, even better, customer value creation-centric. So I hope you get started. I hope you learn these things. I have a lot of information on LinkedIn. If you're interested, videos, all kinds of background information and short articles to describe in more detail what we actually did. Okay, well, that's it. Take care. Be safe, be good. Bye-bye.